All right, let's talk a little bit about federalism. Federalism is, if you don't remember, it's the shared powers between the federal, state, and local governments. We generally talk about it between the federal and state governments, but the local governments really are in there too. We have like 85,000 governments working in the United States, kind of in conjunction with one another. I don't know if they would pull this out on the AP test. I highly kind of doubt it. But if they do, remember we had this long list of definitions for federalism that more specific, like how you could interpret how the powers should be divvied up. This idea of dual federalism, where the federal government does the essential stuff and the states really should have the bulk of the power. Kind of the way that the courts had interpreted federalism for the first part of the year, the first part of our country's history. And then a lot of these, I think, you can kind of, just from the term, can kind of divulge what it means. Like fiscal federalism is giving money to states in order to carry out duties. Cooperative federalism is state and federal governments cooperating to make something happen. Competitive federalism is, again, governments kind of competing against one another to get people to live certain spots or for certain things. So we picked to become a federalist country. Now, there's a lot of other alternatives. We tried being a confederate nation under the Articles of Confederation, kind of a loose union with the states really calling most of the shots, federal government having like really little to no power. That obviously did not work very well. Great Britain was what's called a unitary government, which was really tough. The federal government had almost all the power, like virtually everything. Federal government, again, not too harsh, not too weak, right in the middle, just right, like kind of the Three Bears theory. Federalism, we kind of talk about it in Federalist number 10, that federalism is perfect for a big country because we've got lots of different diverse interests, and federalism is going to be able to accommodate the most amount of interests. The fact that different regions of the country maybe have different cultures and maybe some different philosophical beliefs, that, again, their governments can kind of cater to those specific, like the way they live in those parts of the country. They can kind of cater to those ideals, for sure. There's a lot of advantages of federalism, and I don't necessarily love, I'm going to move my face because I don't like being in the words. This is kind of my own phrase, and I don't know a better way to put it. You're always a winner somewhere. Kind of, again, ties into this idea of Federalist number 10, that whatever it is your position is on an issue. Again, if you're a Republican in the state of Michigan and our governor's a Democrat, well, somewhere in some state, in some level of government, in some corner of government, you've got somebody that's fighting for your beliefs. So that's why I say you're always a winner somewhere. So again, if your governor is a Democrat and you're a Republican, somewhere out there, somebody's fighting for you. Again, our president's a Republican. If you're a Democrat, well, maybe your state's controlled by a Democrat. Or, again, Democrats in some states are kind of fighting the fight. Again, somebody's battling for your interests. So that's that balance that Federalist number 10 talks about, is we have a lot of interests, and you're going to win some, you're going to lose some. Those balances, those interests are going to balance each other out. You're always a winner somewhere. Federalism is a great laboratory for experiment. A great example is legalizing marijuana. Like, some people are for it, some people are against it. But the thing is, we didn't have to make a federal law that said, boom, everybody's going to do this. It's going to be legal everywhere. If it's an absolute disaster, an absolute train wreck, that one state that decided to make it legal can all of a sudden say, like, wow, we made a mistake. And everybody else can say, yeah, you clean up that mess. We're not gonna dip our toe into that water. We're done. We're not doing that. But if it's a great success, then all of a sudden it's like, ooh, you have the blueprint. Like, let's do exactly what they did. Colorado was first on the marijuana legalization train, so everybody might say, like, what did you do to make it successful? Or what did you do that wasn't successful? We're not going to make your mistake. However, that kind of goes down. Government is closer to the people. So that simply means that, again, issues that affect you most closely at home in your local or states, local governments or state governments, don't necessarily matter to the country at large. So again, bad roads, In Michigan, here in Michigan, Governor Whitmer campaigned on fix the damn roads. Well, that's not an issue everywhere else. Again, people in Washington probably aren't concerned with Michigan's roads. But because we have a federal system of government, our state government can worry about the roads. So again, that affects us closer to home. And there are certain things that a local government affects that, right here, all of a sudden, people throughout the rest of the state of Michigan probably don't care about either. We don't have to iron out every difference. Like I mentioned, man, there are lots of different parts of the country that view things very, very differently. On a federal level, we do not have to all agree, like, this is how we want to live our lives. So the state of Michigan might say, no, we're not doing this particular thing. While California might say, like, everybody here seems to love the idea. We're going to make it legal to do this here. Before 2000, I think it's 2015 that gay marriage was in the Supreme Court kind of made legal for everybody. That's one of those things that the states kind of handled on their own. They didn't have to say like, Vermont, I think, was the first to jump on board. Vermont said, we're ready, let's do it. Like, everybody here seems to like it, or the vast majority seem to like it. There's other spots that maybe you're like, we're not quite there yet. So you don't have to iron out every difference. So those states that were ready to jump on board, they didn't have to be held back by states that are like, ooh, we're not there. In the same time, those states that aren't there don't have to jump in because of the states that are. So again, people aren't held back and people aren't pushed forward before they're ready. You don't have to iron out every difference on every issue. That's the case. Powers of the national government, very simply, those that are listed in the Constitution specifically are given to the national government. That's pretty much it. That's the powers that they receive. There's a lot of expanding, a lot of reasons for expansion of federal power, because I think we've seen that over the course of our history. The national government has really gotten a lot more power. Supremacy Clause, a really big one. If you don't remember what the Supremacy Clause is if there's ever a conflict between federal and state law, that federal law is going to win. That's going to be the decider. If you don't remember what that is, I do have a document actually in the AP review folder that has that down there during the AP exam. Maybe you use that because I got you. So I already made that document for you. War power. Obviously, states are not going to declare war. So the state of Michigan isn't going to say, like, we're ready for war, like we're declaring war on somebody. That has to be done at a national level. So that expands the power of the federal government because, again, we got to all do that. They control those war powers. That's a big one. Commerce Clause we talked about at length, and that's kind of in another video, but just to kind of shore it up, the ability to regulate business by the federal government is huge because we can tie business activities to almost every other human aspect of life, whether it's the environment or civil rights or safety standards, economic, obviously, issues, that the Commerce Clause can really kind of tie into those things, which allows government to regulate those fields. So pretty big, pretty big. Taxing and spending. Now, taxing and spending is a pretty big power that the federal government has the ability to do. And I feel like as we've kind of gone over this, people kind of forget what we mean. Now, for example, if the government wants to get some sort of behavior out of you, they could decide to raise or lower taxes. We talked about this with like alcohol and tobacco. Those are activities that the government would just assume you really didn't participate in, at least in excess. So they raise taxes on both alcohol and tobacco, hopefully deterring your desire to do those things. Now, most people aren't going to eliminate maybe that from their life if that's something they do, but maybe they're going to cut back on how much they utilize it because of the high taxes. Now, if there's something they want you to do, they could lower the taxes or give you a tax break of some sort. I think in class I talked about when I bought my first house, well, my only house, that I got a tax break because I was a first-time home buyer. And they wanted people weren't buying homes, so they wanted people to get into the housing market. So they gave me $8,000 to basically buy a house. I I was a willing taker. Like, I decided to do that. There's a lot of tax breaks on if you do things to become more eco-friendly. Like if I buy a furnace that's going to become more environmentally friendly, or a car that's more environmentally friendly. Sometimes you get money back on your taxes. The spending feature of Congress as well. Remember, Congress controls the power of the purse. So spending also can influence states to do certain things as well, and people to do things. So if, I think the example I gave during class was the roads in the 1970s and 80s. The federal government said, like, hey, we'd like everybody, all the states, to lower the minimum drinking age to 18. And states were kind of like, we're really not that interested in doing that. Then the federal government came back and said, hey, we'd really like all the states to lower the drinking age to 18, and if you do so, we're going to give you millions of dollars to fix your roads. All of a sudden, the states are like, millions of dollars? 18, 21, who cares? Like, we'll lower it to 18, sure. We want those millions of dollars. So by spending money, sometimes the federal government can entice states to do certain things that they want them to do. Schools are kind of given this all the time, like, hey, if your kids meet this standard or you do these certain things, the federal government will give you money. But if you don't do these things, we're not going to give you cash. Like, so spending that money is a way to entice or bribe, if you want to put it that way, force people or institutions into doing certain things. So federal government gives money to the states all the time. How they give money is in the form of grants a lot of times. We talked about block grants and categorical formula grants. Now, don't be fooled. They may call them categorical formula grants. They may call them categorical grants, or they may call them formula grants. Doesn't matter. They're all the same thing. If you remember, block grants are grants that are given to the states with relatively little to no strings attached. It doesn't mean zero. There usually is some sort of thing they have to do. But by and large, you're able to, as a state, make the call on how you want to execute that plan. Now, they're probably going to give you a general, like, hey, it has to be spent on this certain topic. But what you choose to do with it and how you choose to execute that is up to you. Categorical formula grants are a little more specific, a little more restrictive in that there has to be some sort of plan in order to, that's going to go along with it. And to get the money, you've got to do all the things in the plan. A great example is if your mom gives you money to go buy school clothes. A block, that would be giving you money, kind of like a grant. Says, here's $200, go buy school clothes. But if she gives it to you in the form of a block grant, it would be like, I got $200, got to spend it on school clothes. I can divide it up however I want. Pants, shirts, t-shirts, ties, whatever, socks. Categorical grant would be, again, a more specific plan. It's for school clothes. You got $200. I need you to come back with 3 pairs of pants, a pair of shoes, 4 shirts, and some socks. You got to fill out that plan. Federal government also can do things like mandates. Now, those can be funded or they can be unfunded. Mandates are very simple. It's the federal government basically will say, like, states, you've got to do this. And the states have no ability to say, like, we prefer not to do that. So mandates are something that are given to the states. Now, state governments, really their power is driven from the 10th Amendment. Anything that really is not given to the federal government is reserved for the states. Unless it's directly forbidden to the states in the Constitution, they have everything else. So, the Constitution will tell the national government, these are your powers, and they have a few things that the states can't do. Everything else, it's fair game for the states. That is their power. Some of those things include things like full faith and credit. Remember, we talked about that. These are all things that they have to do. For example, each state has to recognize like a license or like a marriage certificate. So if I get married, I don't have to get married in the state I live in, and then if I move to a different state, it's like, we gotta get married again because we're no longer married. Full faith and credit means if I move to Colorado tomorrow, my marriage would be recognized as being legal. I'm not married, but if I was, that would be the case. Privileges and immunity. You are entitled to the same privileges as anybody else that lives in that state. So there you go. So because of that, if I go to a different state, I pay the same sales tax as the people that live there. I pay the same for gasoline, or I have to follow the same laws. All of that. I get the same privileges as the people that live in that state. The These are a few others for sure. Great examples of federalism include like ratifying amendments, where both the national and state government play a role. Same thing with how we're dealing with the coronavirus. The states and the federal governments are trying to work together to come up with a solution for this.